Let's cut to the chase. The Galaxy Z Fold 6 is easily the best foldable phone Samsung has ever made. It's fascinating as a tech reviewer to be able to see the yearly improvements that the Korean phone maker has made to this form factor to the point where I can experience firsthand the noticeable differences between the previous iterations. The Fold 6 folds up together tighter, it feels more sharp, and is thinner than the Z Fold 5. The question, however, still remains whether there's an actual need for general consumers to spend nearly $2,000 on this type of phone. Does a folding phone experience really do that much more than a regular phone to warrant such a premium price tag? Well, I'm Alex from the Subnautics. We're going to kind of try to answer that question right now. I think the Z Fold 6 comes the closest Samsung has ever been to justifying this experience. Like it or not, we now live in an AI dominated tech world. The Fold 6 is chock full of these features that, when combined with the expanded screen real estate, make for a helpful tool. I guess the best way to describe why anyone would ever want a folding phone like this is simply for convenience. Much like why someone would look into buying a tablet when their smartphone could do the exact same things, the Z Fold does exactly that. It plays into a niche that makes sense on a structural level. More screen real estate makes things easier to get done. From a glance, the Fold 6 looks very similar to its predecessors. However, upon closer inspection, the rounded corners have perked into sharp edges. The more square like structure actually makes the phone more natural to hold. Accompanying the form change, the aluminium frame feels less smooth and in turn actually seems more rugged and firm to hold. The Fold 6 is just way more refined than what I initially thought it was when I received it. This is subjective to the user, but I find this combination of changes to feel better to hold than the previous generation. The cover display is slightly wider and once again sharper than previous models. The sharp lines match the overall physical changes to the build. At a resolution of 968 by 2376p, the 6.3-inch AMOLED display is significantly more satisfying to operate and look at than on previous models. For the first time on a Fold, I can honestly say that the cover display can actually be comparable to a regular Galaxy S phone. It doesn't feel like an afterthought or a weirdly warped aspect ratio size. It just plainly looks and feels like a regular modern smartphone screen, and in this case, that's a good thing. It's also plenty acceptable to look at with a 410 ppi count. I do think many people will go a majority of the day never opening the Z Fold and only relying on the cover screen, and this is a decent one to use. Unfortunately, not everything that was needed to change found a place onto this iteration of the phone. We're 6 generations in, and the cover display is still not compatible with the S Pen. This is another example of something that doesn't seem to matter much on the surface when you see the specs and stuff, but makes a lot of sense to a daily user. When I do have an S Pen case on the Z Fold, I find it only beneficial to write on the open display when it's set flat on a table. I passionately dislike writing on the screen while open when I'm holding it in the expanded display with my hands. As I'm right-handed, I can't utilize handles on magnetic accessories to keep the phone gripped solidly. This means I have to either stretch out my palm and extend my fingers all the way to wrap around the square, or to hold my pinky onto the bottom frame to somewhat lock the phone in place. Neither of these methods are comfortable for the long haul. With a wider cover display, this was the perfect year to finally add S Pen support to make Samsung's most premium phone write more like a Galaxy S Ultra. That makes the bigger screen writing experience the bonus cherry on top that we users can then choose to utilize whenever we feel like. Instead, that's the only option. When you do open it up, though, you're greeted with a 7.6-inch 1856 by 2160p AMOLED screen that still has that wow factor that the device is known for. This is the 6th iteration of a folding phone from Samsung, but each time I still load up that wallpaper engine theme onto these types of phones, I can't help but marvel at just what I'm looking at. Although the display is a near exact replica of the Fold 5 on the spec sheet, it really does feel like a completely different experience because of those sharp edges. I find myself popping the phone open more to use this display than I did on the Fold 5s. It feels more natural to look at videos and images on the Fold 6. There's something about those rounded corners with that slight black bezels that make the Fold 5 seem less, I guess, premium of a viewing experience than it was. I didn't realize just how off it felt to me until I booted up the Fold 6 for the first time and saw it sharp edges instead of curved. It was instantly discernible. With the Qualcomm Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 processor and 12 gigabytes of RAM powering this phone, the Z Fold 6 performs at the top tier of smartphones. My configuration has 512 gigabytes of storage, and when it comes to just plain old smartphone things, the Z Fold 6 is a beast. It definitely runs everything I threw at it, and it didn't get as hot as I thought it would based on my experience with previous Fold models. Ultimately, there's nothing to complain about when it comes to the performance here. Phones like this are really easy to review as it handles everything easily. And in the most intense smartphone tasks, it just does. The real question in regards to performance is whether the user will be able to utilize the multitasking capabilities of this added real estate enough to warrant the need to open the display up. I still don't capitalize on the real estate for multi-window navigation of Android as much as I really should. Instead, I rely on the bigger screen for things like reading purposes. Whether that's an article or a manga or a comic book, I personally find this function to be where I appreciate this phone's larger screen size the most. Other things that don't need to be discussed much as they've kind of retained their usefulness and haven't really changed much are the side mounted fingerprint scanner, as that doubles as a power button. It's still fast, it's still reliable. And then the stereo loudspeakers are located at the top and the bottom of the cover display. They get decently loud, but aren't necessarily warm to listen to, so they're just kind of there. I'd also argue the same is true for the camera results, too. We have a triple rear sensor setup of a 50 megapixel f1.8 wide, a 10 megapixel f2.4 telephoto, and a 12 megapixel f2.2 ultra wide. This is a standard fare that really covers most of what anyone can expect from a modern smartphone camera at this current moment. The photo taking capabilities here don't break any glass ceilings, nor does it wow me, but photos are sharp and give that expected Samsung saturation palette that anyone who has owned a Samsung phone can attest to. I'm at the point with many smartphone camera performances where, from the year to year results, they kind of stagnated, to be honest. It then becomes a preference of whether I like the look of what the camera's AI processing power can do with the saturation, exposure, and other things that OEMs have kind of deemed as upgrades in their new iterations. A good example of this is with low light photos here. In the ongoing quest to be able to shoot visible photos without any light, many cameras like the Z Fold 6s rely heavily on software processing. Some shots don't even look like they were taken in the dark anymore. There's an unnatural tint. The exposure doesn't really seem right some of the times, and the added noise isn't worth the image degradation, in my opinion. This isn't like pumping up the ISO on a camera either. It's an entirely different kind of issue, I would say, that smartphone photography has propped up over the years with AI. The Z Fold 6 has a decent sized 4,400 milliamp hour battery that supports 15 watt wireless charging and 25 watt wired charging. On average, this folding phone should last most people until the end of the day when they return home from a long day at work. When I kept the phone usage strictly to business and like casual web browsing stuff, I had no problem ending my night at around 40% after 14 hours or so off the plug. However, if I did play any games, any type of games that require farming daily missions, you know exactly the type, guys. The Z Fold 6 did drain quicker than I had anticipated. A 30-minute session of Hong Kong Star Rail surprisingly took a bigger chunk out of the battery life than I usually experience on other flagship level phones, at least that I've experienced this year. Still, I found the battery life to be sufficient enough. So all of this leads us back to new AI features. Marketing materials would make it seem like a majority of Fold users will be pulling out their phone for drawing rough sketches every day and having AI make it prettier or bring your sketches to life. Well, at least for me, I tried it out a few times, and while it was kind of neat, I have no need for use cases for something like this that comes to mind. I really don't. I do think that this type of buyer that the Fold 6 is marketed towards, especially at this price tag, will find things like Note Assist and the interpreter flex mode to be neat features that situationally can be beneficial. AI does provide Samsung with a path forward to utilize the full value of a folding device of this size, but I don't think it is necessary, and I don't think a lot of people will capitalize on all of these features. While I still don't think the Fold 6 offers enough benefits to justify the hefty price tag for most customers, I can at least acknowledge that the line is advancing every generation. It may not be leaps and bounds better, but it is indeed better. Once again, I'm Alex from the Semnotics. Let me know what you guys think of this generation of the Z Fold 6 and whether you like those new sharper edges over the rounded edges of the previous years. And I'll see you guys in the next video.